13. Reality itself, and only reality itself, self-recognizes reality itself. Therefore, reality itself is the only way to really realize real God, which is reality itself. The egoless real self-nature, self-condition, and self-state that is reality itself, or real God, necessarily always already entirely and only self-recognizes reality itself as the self-nature, self-condition, self-state, and source condition, or the egoless, indivisible, causal, transcendental, spiritual, perfectly subjective, all-in-all self-organizing, all-in-all self-correcting, all-in-all self-rightening, all-in-all self-brightening, and self-evidently divine self-context and source context of all and all that apparently and conditionally arises. 14. The way to really realize real God is the searchless and intrinsically ego-transcending or intrinsically ecstatic life practice of constant, whole-bodily and tacit or pre-verbal true or esoteric, thoroughly non-egoic and thus intrinsically non-religious prayer. The inherently ego-bound and ego-binding prayer of request for favours is false prayer, or intrinsically non-ecstatic or even anti-ecstatic pseudo-prayer. Religious prayer is inherently ego-based, ego-driven, ego-serving, ego-binding, and thus false. False prayer inherently and actively dissociates from, and therefore does not participate in or really realize real God, or the intrinsically egoless, intrinsically ecstatic, indivisible, and a causal self-nature, self-condition, and self-state that is reality itself. True prayer is intrinsically egoless, intrinsically ecstatic, and free of the method and purposedness of search. 15. True, or esoteric, thoroughly non-egoic, and thus intrinsically non-religious prayer does not begin with or arise from the context of causes and effects and point of view, or the conventional religious context of separate ego I, objective world, and creator God. Real God, or reality itself, is the egoless, indivisible, a causal, transcendental, and spiritual source context, and not the cause. Therefore, real God is not the egoically envisioned and time and space characterized creator God at the beginning and at the end of all and all, but real God is the perfectly subjective and perfectly egoless and perfectly all-in-all self-organizing and perfectly all-in-all self-correcting and perfectly all-in-all self-rightening and perfectly all-in-all self-brightening and perfectly all-in-all transcending self-context, self-nature, self-condition, and self-state of all and all that apparently and conditionally, or by means of cause and effect processes and events, arises to any and every point of view. 16. Rather than beginning from the objective world, or the objective self, or in the already ego-bound desires and problems and searches of the bodily and altogether psychophysically and politically and socially and economically and culturally defined child of humankind, True or esoteric, intrinsically ecstatic, and thoroughly non-egoic prayer is the non-religious reality process of all and all surrendering, perfectly searchless, and always priorly egoless participatory communion with the intrinsically egoless self-nature, self-condition, and self-state that is real God, or self-evidently divine reality itself. 17. Acting as if there is a something big out there that is interested in responding to the ego I is a principle seeking method human beings everywhere and in all times use to access and animate something inside the ego self that is otherwise non-conscious and inaccessible. This seeking method works like magic, but it is actually a practical means for accessing various psychophysical elements of the ego self that are not otherwise activated in daily living. Therefore, this seeking method does not and cannot access something big out there, but it can, in a roundabout manner, partially access something big inside. Nevertheless, whether it is sought and accessed and employed inside or outside, the enterprises and seeking methods, both sacred and secular, that human egos use to exploit the something big are ego-based, ego-serving, ego-limited, and ego-bound, and inherently and irreducibly dissociated even by the very effort of seeking from necessarily egoless and tacit or mind-transcending and altogether really ecstatic participation in the intrinsically egoless truth that is reality itself. 18. There is no right and true reality basis for verbal mental talking to real God. All talking to God, whether to a religiously defined God myth or to somehow presumed real God, is the exercise of mind within itself, seeking to cause desired effects in the conditions of the bodily ego I and its conditionally experienced apparent world. All talking to God, and indeed all exercise of seeking mind, including the scientific rationalist effort to know and control the presumed to be material universe, is an exercise of egoically based and verbally enacted mind within mind, which, as an active actual event and process, is a seeking method of appeal to the otherwise silent or pre-verbal and non-objective and non-conscious depth of the brain-body complex. All talking to God is a conscious verbal mind and inherently rather superficial activity of resorting to the otherwise non-conscious, pre-verbal and non-mental depth of conditionally experiential awareness. All talking to God is the action of the mentally conceived ego self appealing to a depth of its own being that transcends the egoic self-mind. All talking to God is ego-based, and it cannot and wills to not exceed or transcend egoity itself. All talking to God, including all verbal requesting for favours from God and any and all other dramatizations of familiarity with the deity, is ego-based or egoic and total psychophysical self-contraction based, false or neurotic prayer. All false or neurotic prayer is an activity and process of the ego mind talking to itself and to the pre-verbal brain within the inherently limited and limiting context of the body. True or esoteric, thoroughly non-egoic and thus intrinsically non-religious prayer is the really ecstatic whole bodily or pre-verbal or non-mental brain and body activity and process of ego-transcending brain and body participation in egoless indivisibility, a causal, transcendental, spiritual, and self-evidently divine reality itself, perfectly prior to and beyond the brain, the mind, the body, and the conditionally arising apparent world of point of view. False or merely exoteric, ego-based, ego-serving, mind-based, mind-exercising, and inherently neurotic or self-contraction-based and fear-based, and thus inherently non-ecstatic prayer merely and egoically observes the idea of objective God and seeks to observe the magical effects of objective God, whereas true or esoteric and really ego-transcending and intrinsically ecstatic prayer participates in reality itself as the egoless, transcendental, spiritual, and self-evidently divine self-nature, self-condition, self-state, and all in all transcending source context of all and all that apparently and conditionally arises. 19. The ego I is the root phenomenon of verbal mind. All of exoteric religion, including Creator God religion, is a construct of verbal mind based upon the root idea of ego I, or the naively presumed and psychophysically enacted separate self of perceptual or space and time located point of view. All of conventional science, including scientism or reductionist scientific realism, which is based upon the philosophy of materialism, is, like all of exoteric religion, a construct of verbal mind based upon the root idea of ego I, or the naively presumed and psychophysically enacted separate self of perceptual or space and time located point of view. The way that is reality itself is a radical or always at the root process that always already and persistently transcends verbal mind, ego I, exoteric or ego-based and verbal mind-based religion, and conventional science, or the ego-based and verbal mind-based philosophy and enterprise of scientific materialism. Reality itself, or real God, is always already prior to ego I, verbal mind, space-time, point of view, and all of cause and effect. The way of reality itself, or the way of egoless participation in and really realizing perfect self-realization or intrinsic realization of reality itself, is a pre-verbal and pre-egoic or tacit and non-seeking process that intrinsically and always priorly or always already transcends ego I, verbal mind, and space and time locatedness or point of view. The way that is reality itself is an always pre-mental, pre-verbal, pre-egoic, pre-religious, and pre-scientific or pre-object-minded and perfectly subjective and perfectly ecstatic process of tacit surrender of the brain and body complex to the indivisible and self-evidently divine self-conscious light, divine conscious light, in which body, mind, self and world are, as a perceptual and conceptual point of view experience, arising as apparent self-modifications of the indivisible conscious light that is reality itself. 20. Fear causes the idea illusion of other or object to arise. Fear is the primal psychophysical evidence of the self-contraction of the brain and body complex of perceptual point of view awareness. Fear is the state of non-ecstasy or possession by egoic self-contraction. Fear is the bodily-based root cause of the idea illusion and the ego-directed religious life search for the divine or reality itself as an objective deity, that it is both hoped and doubted can and will eliminate the ego's intrinsic fear by supplying the egoic body-mind self with favors and supports. The verbal mind, rooted in total psychophysical self-contraction and in the primal conception that is ego I itself, is the essential or root cause of fear. The fundamental or root transcending of verbal mind or ego mind by prior and searchless transcending of all of psychophysical self-contraction is the one and essential and intrinsically ecstatic practice and process wherein and whereby fear and all of objective deity religion are transcended. On the basis of the fundamental or root transcending of verbal mind or ego mind by prior and searchless transcending of all of psychophysical self-contraction, the perfectly ecstatic reality way and reality process of the real realizing of real God or self-evidently divine reality itself is made possible and can thus and so, on the basis of reality itself, be really begun. 21. In fact, all conditionally arising psychophysical conditions, perceptions, thoughts, and states always and inherently and necessarily modify or apparently transform the transcendental spiritual consciousness and energy or egoless indivisible divine conscious light that is reality itself. Therefore, all thoughts cause and are themselves effects of changes in the psychophysical conditions of individual experience and in the total apparent sphere of conditionally arising and cause and effect driven phenomena. Thoughts and actions can be changed, corrected, and rightened in their effects, and even the causing of thought and action can be perfectly transcended. Only such changing, correcting, rightening, and perfect transcending of thought and action is true and intrinsically ecstatic prayer. 22. The ego-transcending process of changing, correcting, rightening, and fundamentally and priorly perfectly transcending thought and action, or the searchless and ego-transcending converting of thought and action to the whole bodily recognition responsive devotional practice of right life and right knowledge, is the practical secret of egoless, non-religious, perfectly esoteric, and perfectly ecstatic true prayer. The perfectly ecstatic reality way of perfectly esoteric true prayer is pre-religious rather than anti-religious. The perfectly ecstatic reality way of perfectly esoteric true prayer is non-religious because the reality way is exercised prior to ego I, ego mind, and all modes and methods of ego-based and ego-serving search. The perfectly ecstatic reality way of perfectly esoteric true prayer is whole bodily, tacit, or pre-verbal and thus pre-mental surrender of ego I, which is the root construction in mind and all of mind itself, or all of point of view perception, which objectifies the world as separate forms, and all of point of view conception, which objectifies and objectively analyzes describes, names, and relates to the world of presumed to be separate forms. The perfectly ecstatic reality way of perfectly esoteric true prayer surrenders all of ego mind and all of egoic and total psychophysical self-contraction to and into egoless participation in self-evidently divine reality itself, which intrinsically, priorly or always already, and perfectly transcends ego I, both personal and collective, and all of the constructs of mind, both perceptual and conceptual. 24. In the only by me divinely avatautely self-revealed and self-given reality way of Adidam, or Adidam Vishuradam, there is no practice of false prayer, or of exoteric religious prayer method, or of ego-based verbal prayer exercises, or of any method of talking to God in secret. In the only by me divinely avatautely self-revealed and self-given reality way of Adidam, there is an esoteric, non-religious, intrinsically egoless, and actively ego-transcending, and intrinsically ecstatic practice of true prayer. In the only by me divinely avatautely self-revealed and self-given reality way of Adidam, the esoteric practice of intrinsically ecstatic true prayer is the ego-transcending and searchless process of ego-transcending whole bodily or mind-transcending brain and body participation in egoless, indivisible, accursal, and transcendental spiritual reality itself. In the only by me divinely avatautely self-revealed and self-given reality way of Adidam, the esoteric exercise of intrinsically ecstatic true prayer is whole bodily or total psychophysical participatory process of ego transcending radical or always at the root devotion to me, right life obedience to me, and perfect knowledge of me as I am, divinely avatautely self-revealed as the egoless, indivisible, accursal, transcendental, avatautely self-revealed as the egoless, indivisible, accursal, transcendental spiritual, and self-evidently divine self-nature, self-condition, self-state, and perfectly subjective source context that is reality itself. 25. In the only by me divinely avatautely self-revealed and self-given reality way of Adidam, the esoteric practice of intrinsically ecstatic true prayer is pre-verbal, or tacit and whole bodily, or total psychophysical, or mind-transcending and brain-body surrendering, and both priorly and actively ego-transcending, devotionally and really realizing participation in divinely avatarically self-revealed real God. 26. The characteristic exoteric religious method associated with the first three stages of life and the characteristic esoteric religious method associated with the fourth stage of life seek ecstasy by turning the body toward the religiously objectified divine by means of prescriptive moral and emotional means, including request prayer, invocatory prayer, and contemplative prayer. The characteristic esoteric method of associated with the fifth stage of life seeks ecstasy by turning attention toward the inner depth of the bodily and altogether psychophysical being by means of prescriptive methods, practices of mental interiorization, and meditative techniques of spiritual ascent within. The characteristic esoteric method associated with the sixth stage of life seeks ecstasy by, first, establishing a certainty presumption that the body-mind and the totality of the body-mind complex is entirely not self, and then dissociatively introverting the inner being away from the body and the totality of the thus negatively objectified body-mind self. In reality itself, the body is intrinsically egoless, non-separate, non-objective, and non-personal. The only by me revealed and given, and perfectly esoteric, and perfectly or always priorly or always already ecstatic seventh stage of life is always priorly or always already self-established in and as reality itself, and as such, in the intrinsically egoless, non-separate, non-objective, and non-personal, and thus perfectly subjective self-nature, self-condition, and self-state of the totality of conditional existence, and thus of the body. In the only by me revealed and given seventh stage of life, ecstasy is always already the case, and therefore ecstasy need not be sought. The only true ecstasy need not be sought and cannot be achieved. All seeking for ecstasy is self-evidently a dramatization of the failure to intrinsically self-realize ecstasy as the case in the present. The only true ecstasy is the ecstasy that is always already the case. Therefore, the only true ecstasy is the ecstasy intrinsic to reality itself. The only by me revealed and given seventh stage of life is the demonstration of self-abiding, divine self-recognition of the body and, indeed, of all of conditionally apparent existence in and as the intrinsically egoless and indivisible self-nature, transcendental spiritual self-condition, and self and perfect self-state of reality itself. The only by me divinely avataric self-revealed and self-given reality way of Adidam is the divine and perfectly searchless way of the intrinsic or always prior self-realization of perfect ecstasy. Thus and so, the only by me divinely avatarically self-revealed and self-given reality way of Adidam is the right and true esoteric and priorly and thoroughly ego-transcending and thus non-religious and whole-bodily devotional and really reality-realizing life practice of true prayer, which is the intrinsic or always prior self-realization of perfect ecstasy. Perfect ecstasy requires perfect prayer. Perfect prayer is whole bodily ecstatic participation in the life process of perfect or intrinsic egolessness. The perfect demonstration of perfectly egoless perfect prayer is the seventh stage of life process of divinely self-recognizing and at last perfectly outshining all and all in and as the self-existing, self-radiant, indivisible, accursal, perfectly egoless, and self-evidently divine conscious light itself. The only by me divinely avatarically self-revealed and self-given radical or always at the root reality way of Adidam or Adidam Vishiradam is the intrinsically perfect prayer of the perfect demonstration of perfectly egoless perfect prayer. 27. The only by me divinely avatarically self-revealed and self-given radical or always at the root reality way of Adidam or Adidam Vishiradam is the divinely avatarically self-revealed and self-given necessary and perfect means for the great restoration of global humankind to the cooperative world culture of intrinsically egoless truth itself, and thus to a world culture founded on the principles of searchlessness and always prior ecstasy, and thus to a world culture all and all conformed to the intrinsic prior unity that is the direct extension of reality itself, and to the egoless, the causal, transcendental spiritual, and self-evidently divine indivisibility that is reality itself. Da, da, da.